To Canada now, which is dropping many of its retaliatory tariffs against the United States. Canada has been holding talks with the US on a new economic and security relationship for months, but the two sides are not yet close to a deal. Prime Minister Mark Carney says he hopes to restart talks with Canada's biggest trading partner.
So as we work to address outstanding trade issues with the United States, it's important, it's vital. We do everything we can to preserve this unique advantage for Canadian workers, Canadian businesses. And doing so will require both building on a soon-to-be revised CUSMA, our free trade agreement with the U.S. and Mexico, as well as developing a new form of trade and security partnership with the United States. In this context, and consistent with Canada's commitment to CUSMA, I'm announcing today that the Canadian government will now match the United States by removing all of Canada's tariffs on U.S. goods specifically covered under CUSMA.
It's great to welcome Evan Dyer now. He's a senior reporter with the Canadian public broadcaster CBC. Evan, thanks so much for your time. Could you tell us a bit more about Carney's decision to lift these retaliatory tariffs? Why is he doing it now?
Well, I mean, one of the aspects of this is just that, of course, tariffs are a tax on your own people. And many of the products that were coming into Canada, some of the products that were subject to these tariffs were elements, components that Canadian manufacturers, for example, need to build their own products. So they were losing, they're paying to bring them in and losing that value added from them. And of course, it also makes life slightly more expensive for the Canadian consumer. But I think the main reason that we're seeing this happen now is just to send a signal to the United States that Canada is willing to play ball, wants to move forward in these negotiations that are ongoing. And this is a sort of a peace offering, if you like, from one of the two countries that has perhaps retaliated the most to U.S. tariffs, because really Canada and China have sort of been identified by the Trump administration as the troublemakers who push back with counter tariffs. Canada, of course, is not dropping all of its counter tariffs. And I should say that this is not actually going to be that impactful in dollar terms. It's more of a symbolic gesture to say to the Trump administration, okay, we're willing to drop these, and actually to tell the Canadian population that in doing so, we're merely matching what the U.S. is doing, because in fact, the U.S. had already exempted from its own tariffs goods that were CUSMA compliant. In other words, goods that were traded under the new version of NAFTA. Canada had not, and now Canada is doing the same thing. So Canada will tell Carney has told the Canadian population, look, see, we're just making it the same both ways. But of course, everybody knows, and the government is not denying this, that the dollar amount of U.S. tariffs on Canada is much larger than the dollar amount that we have on them. But this is a peace offering, and it seems that it has got some kind of a positive response from Washington. And the intent is just to get to a situation where we can resolve all of these outstanding issues, hopefully in one big deal that would include a complete renegotiation of CUSMA. But failing that, at least resolve the tariff issue now, and then deal with the renegotiation of CUSMA, which is scheduled for next year.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Let's talk a bit about that. What happens now? Because as I understand, the US, Mexico, Canada trade pact, for example, is up for review next year. And you would assume that preserving this would be critical for Canada.
It is critical for Canada. I mean, Canada does very much want to keep that free trade deal, although with each passing month, it seems to be worth less, in the sense that our supposedly free trade with the United States is no longer free. And we have increasingly less faith in the guarantees of CUSMA that this will be a free trade arrangement going forward. With the Trump administration, the government of Canada has learned that you should always be ready for the next shoe to drop, the next surprise. Canada doesn't respond anymore to what the Trump administration says it will do. It only responds once it actually does it. So I think that while Canadians and the Canadian government certainly see CUSMA as a less valuable deal because it's no longer being respected the way that NAFTA was by previous U.S. administrations, they still want to preserve it.
Now, Carney campaigned for Prime Minister and won using this slogan called elbows up. And this is a hockey term that was adopted to stand up to Donald Trump. Now the opposition and unions are accusing him of appeasing Trump. How fair is that claim, do you think?
Well, that term, which actually was invented by a comedian, Mike Myers, and then adopted by Carney, did indeed help him to get elected. And we have indeed heard a lot less of it since he was elected. He today actually referenced that and used some other hockey metaphors, perhaps, which might not sound that familiar to Europeans. He said, okay, well, there's a time for elbows up. In other words, there's a time for brawling when you're having these kinds of trade negotiations. And then there's a time for stick handling, which I guess the soccer equivalent would be dribbling the ball. And that's when you try to get the puck in the net, the ball in the net, and you stop the brawling. But we haven't really seen a lot of brawling. We have seen counter tariffs, but we haven't really seen as aggressive a pushback, perhaps, as that term might suggest. And he has indeed come under criticism from the opposition and today from a prominent union. But I must say that there are other people who are taking his side. And of course, we, like Germany, have a very strong federal system where the provinces have a great deal of power. And sometimes some of the most important politicians are not just the federal opposition party leaders, but also the people who actually run provinces like the province of Ontario, which is home to, for example, the entire Canadian auto industry pretty much, and is one of the main economic motors of the country. And he's received support so far from those premiers. The premiers of Ontario, the premier of Alberta, who would normally align herself very strongly with the opposition, is supporting this move. And so he can take some comfort from that. From business, he's getting some support as well. But as you say, he has received criticism from the unions. He's received criticism from the main opposition party. But the main opposition party is somewhat weakened in Canada. Its own leader lost his seat during the election. And we've actually seen that Carney has risen in the polls since being elected. So I think so far the Canadian public has shown that it's willing to go along with this strategy. And I don't think that also the fact that so many other countries have appeared to fold to the United States, the British, honestly, the EU, frankly, to some extent, also appeared to sort of fold to the United States. And compared to that, we have seen a somewhat more elbows up attitude from Canada, which does have counter tariffs and will still have counter tariffs even after this initiative. I mean, Canada is maintaining tariffs on American autos, American steel, and I believe also on American aluminum. So there will still be some Canadian tariffs in place, and most countries have not retaliated at all.
Thanks so much for that, Evan. That's Evan Dyer with the Canadian public broadcaster CBC.
Thanks.
All right, I want to go now to our correspondent, Benjamin Alvarez Gruber. He is following the story for us from Washington. Benjamin, you were listening to Carney's press conference there. What is he trying to achieve with this move?
So this was a highly expected announcement during this press conference. There were some reports about that in Canadian media already, and now the Prime Minister actually mentioned these 3 points on his aims about these broader negotiations with the United States. He said that those are protecting Canadian workers. He said also the families, reinforcing what he said is competitiveness of Canadian businesses, of course, are impacted by these tariffs by the United States, and also aiming for Canada to be the strongest economy within the G7. He highlighted this new announcement that you just mentioned there, Brent, saying that this is a very good trade deal for Canada with the US. He still highlighted that there are some differences to what this trade relationship between both countries looked like before, but he called it a positive development that Washington said that it will not impose tariffs on Canadian goods that comply with this agreement between the US, Mexico, and Canada.
And so what has been the reaction from the Trump administration?
So President Trump himself reacted from the Oval Office. He praised this move to drop these counter tariffs. He said, and I quote, "We are working with something we want to be very good to Canada." He said that they're working on something without providing additional details to what it might look like. He also said that he likes Carney a lot. Let's remember both of them met several times during the last G7 summit in Alberta. And before Trump reacted, it was also a White House official that welcomed this news. He called it long overdue, and this official also said that the White House is looking forward to continue the discussions with Canada, not only on trade, but also on what he said are national security concerns.
So it doesn't sound like Trump is taking a big victory lap here, but I'm wondering, is this a win for Trump and his, many would say rather aggressive trade policy?
You can definitely call it aggressive trade policy, and that's also what the Canadian Prime Minister said when he started saying that the US is basically changing the trade relationship with all the countries it is trading with. But it might be interesting to see if this move by the Canadian Prime Minister will actually lead to some problems back home. He has been accused of gradually taking a softer tone. He started, after winning his election, proposing a so-called digital service tax that several US companies disliked. He dropped further talks on sanctions, so there might be some problems back home now because the leader of the Conservatives, the largest opposition party in Canada, is accusing Carney of taking a too soft approach with the United States. But of course, President Trump here is seeing this as one of the aims of adding additional pressure, and then praising, in this case, the Canadian Prime Minister for announcing this new move aimed at normalizing the trade relationship between Canada and the US.
Okay, DW's Benjamin Alvarez Gruber with the latest from Washington. Benjamin, thank you.